You can have more than, in some cases, you can have more than one thing that's true. And in this case, you have two different people groups who have truthful, rightful claims to the land and who love the land. And looking at this objectively, we can say, oh, it's just this side or it's just this side. But when you get on the ground and you talk to people, and I've been to Israel 5 times, and I've had lots of conversations with Jewish settlers of the land, and I love their story, and I'm like, yeah, I'm with you. And I talk to Palestinians who are there, and I hear their story, and I say, yeah, I love your story, I'm with you. So stories matter, and these are sort of a rough idea of kind of what the two stories are, okay? Two different groups who are laying claim to the land, and both have pretty solid footing to stand on. So, we're talking about what this land looks like. Here's some maps. So here's a little picture of Israel. You see Egypt, it borders to the west, Jordan on the east, Syria on the northeast, and Lebanon on the north. That's the land of Israel. I think I got some pictures here. So these are kind of important bodies of water. So the Sea of Galilee, that's that little sea at the top there. That's where Jesus did lots of his ministry. And the Jordan River runs from the Sea of Galilee down to the Dead Sea, which is at the bottom. And obviously you got the Mediterranean Sea on the other side. So you'll sometimes hear the slogan, from the river to the sea. And this is one of the kind of the cries of the Palestinian people who want the Jewish people completely gone, is from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. And when they say the river to the sea, they mean the Jordan River, which is the eastern border, and the Mediterranean Sea, which is the western border. Important areas, disputed areas. So you've got the Golan Heights at the top. We'll talk about that. That's an area that used to be part of Syria. It's now part of Israel. You have the West Bank in the middle. So that's kind of that kidney-shaped piece. And it's called the West Bank because it's on the west bank of the Jordan River, even though it's on the eastern side of Israel. Make sense? West bank of the river. You see Jerusalem, which is just kind of on the... Jerusalem is actually kind of where the M is of Jerusalem. And then the Gaza Strip, so all the stuff that's going on in Israel right now is happening in the Gaza Strip, and that's that little tiny strip at the bottom. I forget what I have for maps. Yeah. That is the size of the Gaza Strip. Just past Crystal City to Manitou, about 4 miles wide. This is a tiny country. Like all of Israel is tiny. The Gaza Strip is tiny. And anybody know approximately how many people you have living in the Gaza Strip? Around 2 million people. Can you imagine 2 million people living between us and Manitou in a 4-mile wide strip? So we're talking about a very small part of the world, a very dense part of the world. So that's a little bit about kind of the general geography. Questions so far? Yeah. It is not a country. It would be under the category of a disputed territory. And so for the last dozen or so years, it's been under completely control of the Palestinians. So Israel left there in 2005, and so it's 100% Palestinian controlled. Now, obviously with the war, Israel has been back in, but not a sovereign nation like Canada or the US or something like that. Good question. Palestinians are not Jewish. Good question. So Israel, well, I'll talk about this as we go on. I'll answer your question in 1 minute. So Israel was created on May 14th, 1948. So we think of Canada as a young country, right? Because Canada is only, how old's Canada? 160 years old or something like that, 170. And that's a pretty young country as far as the world goes. This is a very young country. Some of you in this room were alive when Israel became a country, right? Israel, Leo nods his head. Do you remember this, Leo? You were too young. So it's a very young country, 1948. Other countries around here, by the way, like Jordan, Jordan and Syria became countries in the 1920s. Iraq, 1932. So these countries are young. I mean, these civilizations have been around for thousands of years, but as modern countries, they're very young. Lebanon, 1946. So population of Israel, around 9.8 million people. That's, how much is Canada? Are we at 40 now or something? 35 million or something? A third to a quarter of Canada. And it's small, 8,500 square miles. So the closest approximation would be the state of New Jersey. If you know your American geography at all, New Jersey is a tiny little state beside New York. Anybody know how many square miles in the province of Manitoba? Take a guess. You're right, Ben. 250,000 square miles. You couldn't hear it on the recording, but Ben just hollered it out. Manitoba is 250,000 square miles. Israel is 8,500. You can fit 30 Israels in the province of Manitoba. So this, I just want you to get the scope of how tiny a country it is. Like if there was no traffic, you could drive from one side of the country to the other in an hour, easily. North to the south in a few hours. So it's a very small country. These are very small territories we're talking about. People groups. Okay, so this is your answer. About 73% of Israel is Jewish. Most of these come from European Jewish immigrants who came in after World War II, and we'll talk about that whole story. It's hard to say, you can't ethnically say what a Jewish person looks like, because some Jewish people look like me, and some are dark-skinned, some are from other more dark-skinned countries who have Jewish roots and have come to this land. So they look like all different kinds of people. But about 73% are Jewish. About 21% are Arab or Palestinian. And that would be more your stereotypical, what you think of as a Middle Eastern person. Whatever you sort of picture with the head covering and the dark skin, whatever. I don't want to say anything racist I shouldn't say here, right? But you can kind of picture what a dark-skinned person from there looks like. Yes? Yeah, having a mother who is Jewish makes you Jewish, and you can also convert to Judaism. So anyone in this room could become Jewish, right? I know someone who's made that conversion, who grew up in a Christian home and converted to Judaism. So you can make that conversion and be Jewish. The state of Israel wouldn't recognize that as much as being ethnically Jewish. But if you live in Thailand and you can prove that you had a Jewish mother, you can emigrate to Israel as a Jewish person. Yeah, good question. Yeah, Marge. Yeah, we'll look at some of the maps yet. But yeah, so when we talk about, does this thing have this has a laser on it, doesn't it? I thought it did. Tyson used to always play with it. There it is. Okay, so Judah is right around there. Samaria is kind of around there. So when the 12 tribes conquered this land, it went down to about here, to the sea. Up here, this is like Dan, that's the northern tribes. And then there was a couple tribes that actually were on this side of the Jordan River. But basically this area here is where original Israelites settled. Not so much down here in the south. Yeah, Stuart. Well, yeah, there's a couple different promises. So God initially promises from, whoops, I'm pressing the wrong button. Sorry, let me get back to where I am. Where's my... originally, it is from the sea, from the river to the sea is essentially what it is. And then there's a marker of Beersheba, which is down there. That was the southern marker. And I forget what the northern, I think it was up around where Dan is, but it's in your Bible. I'll answer that later. Good question. 1967 is your short answer. 1960. Oh yeah, good thing. What? Yeah, when did Golan Heights become part of Israel? 1967. And we'll look at that story. Okay, so these are the people groups of Israel. 73% Jewish, 6% or 21% Arab, and 6% other. Very small other immigrant population for maybe manual labor and things like that. Religiously, 75% would check off Jewish on their survey, which is very close to these numbers might be a little bit dated, but essentially if you're Jewish by ethnicity, you're Jewish by religion. Even though lots of Jewish Israelis are not practicing. They would be secular Jews. They might go to a synagogue once a year or something, but they essentially live a secular life. The same way in Canada, someone who only goes to church on Easter might still check off Christian on their census. And certainly there are lots of observant Jews in Israel as well. 18% Muslim. And so most Palestinians are Muslim. Remember, there was 20% Arab in Israel, and 18% are Muslim. 2% are Christian. I'll talk about them in a second. 2% are Druze. Now, Druze are not Jews. It's very different. Druze is an offshoot of Islam, and it's a very small community. I've been to some Druze villages in Israel. So, you notice that, yeah, Elena. No, good question. This includes West Bank and Gaza Strip. Yeah, all of what's in the boundaries of Israel. So, Israel is only 2% Christian. So if you close your eyes right now and picture a Christian in Israel, who are you picturing? If you're accurate, you should be picturing an Arab Palestinian person. Almost all the Christians in Israel are Palestinians. There are some Messianic Jews who are ethnically Jewish and they have embraced Jesus as a Messiah. They are Christians, but it's a very, very tiny group. Most of the Christians in Israel are Palestinians. And I want to stress this because so many people don't know this. When you read a Bridges for Peace magazine, all the pictures of Palestinians, almost guaranteed, will all be terrorists. They will not show you that the Christians in Israel are Palestinians. Your brothers and sisters, your Christian brothers and sisters in Israel are mostly Palestinians. So places like Nazareth, everybody knows Nazareth, right? Jesus' hometown is 29% Christian. So in a country that's only 2% Christian, Nazareth is 29% Christian. There's lots of Christian countries in that sort of northern area around Nazareth up here. There's quite a few Christian communities. Bethlehem, we've all heard of Bethlehem, right? In 1947, so when Israel became a nation, Bethlehem was 85% Christian. Little town of Bethlehem was 85% Christian, and 100% of those Christians were Palestinians. Okay? In 1998, that went from 85% down to 40% in Bethlehem. In 2016, it's down to 12% in Bethlehem. Bethlehem used to be a Christian community, and all the Christians are leaving. They are going to Canada, they're going to the United States, and they're going to Europe because life is lousy for them in Bethlehem because of their nationality, because they are Palestinians. And there's lots of Palestinian terrorists who have done horrible things, but it makes life bad for all Palestinians. And so I've met many of these Christians in Bethlehem. And if we ever get a chance to go, we will get to go to a woodworking shop, a woodworking co-op of Christian families who bring all their woodworking together. Some of you guys have been to that shop. And this is how they make a living, selling carvings. Lots of the crosses on my wall are bought from those Christians. But life is tough for them, and they're leaving one after another. So when we talk about, we need to pray for Israel, sure, let's make sure we're praying for our Palestinian Christian brothers and sisters. Okay? that's an important part of this story that does not get told enough. Good question. So are they persecuted by their own Palestinian people or by the Israelis? They're not persecuted by their Palestinian. The Muslim Palestinians, for the most part, don't give grief to the Christian Palestinians. But their life is made difficult because they are Palestinian. So they're restricted by the border wall, trying to get through that wall. They can only drive on certain highways. They don't get water to their houses the same way that Israelis get water to their houses. Lots of things like that. So yeah, their life is difficult. It's hard for them to move about the country because they are Palestinian. Yeah. So the oppression does come from the Israeli government for sure. So, right, from Jordan, right? Or, oh, he's from the West Bank, yeah. Yeah, so there are lots of Christian families there, but unfortunately they're leaving, right? And what would you do if you lived in a war-torn country and you had an opportunity to go to Canada or United States? Lots of us would probably go, right, and take our kids. And so the Christian population in Israel just gets lower and lower. Okay. Languages, Hebrew. So Israeli people will speak Hebrew. It's modern Hebrew. It's different than biblical Hebrew, but it's the same language. Arabic, so Palestinians will speak Arabic. Lots of people will be trilingual. Like a tour guide will speak English, Arabic, and Hebrew. Arabic and Hebrew were the two official languages of Israel until 2018. And Israel passed a motion that Hebrew was now the only official language of Israel, which was a real blow to the Palestinian people who make up a big chunk of the country. So now Hebrew is the only official language in Israel. Landon. Yep. Yep. So those guys with the curls down the side, that comes from Leviticus where it says don't shave the sides of your heads. And so they leave these curls as a sign that they're showing it. Those are ultra-Orthodox Jews, and they'll have the big black hats. They are the very strict, very, very devoted to their faith. Their faith is everything. They live in their own communities. If you come into their community and you are not one of them, you can expect to be spit on or have rocks thrown at you, or like they are very strict. So there's some of these communities, like New York City has a big community of ultra-Orthodox Jews as well. So they are very rigid in their following of Torah, Sabbath, and they have very strict. Good question. So there's a wide range of Jewish observances. So that would be on one end. The totally secular Jew would be on the other. And there's Orthodox Jews in there and sort of mainstream. There's different versions of Judaism. Good, man, it's going to be a good class. We only got 3 weeks. Who? Peter. Yep. They've either rejected Jesus because they're faithful Jews and they're still waiting for the Messiah, or they're just not interested in Jesus, they're just secular Jews. And you went to Israel too. I don't know why I picked out Mika and not you. Poor Peter gets left behind. No, not true actually. So up in here, this is not West Bank or Gaza. This is where Nazareth is. Lots of Palestinians live up there. Yeah, good question. So the West Bank we'll talk about, which is mixed. It has Palestinians and Israelis living in it, and that's part of the big contention. Gaza is 100% Palestinian. There are no Jewish people in there at all. And the rest of Israel is mixed as well. Mostly Israeli, but there are lots of, especially up here, of Palestinian communities as well. Yep. Okay. So this is Israel in the Arab world. So when we think of the Arab people as an ethnicity, these are Arab countries. So when you picture an Egyptian or a Palestinian, whatever you're picturing in your head, this is the Arab world. South of that would be the African world, like more dark-skinned, curly-haired people. and this yellow is the Arab world. And so you see where Israel is positioned, right smack in the middle of it. They are very much an anomaly, and you can see how the Arab world would like that little green piece to be gone. Here's Israel in the Muslim world. And so the darker the color, the higher percentage of Muslims. And so you can see again, Israel is smack dab in the center of the Muslim world. So even Turkey, which is not an Arab country as such, is Muslim. Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Libya, Algeria, they're in the heart of the Arab world and in the heart of the Muslim world, which is why these radical Muslims would very much like them to be wiped off the map and to be cleansed. They see Israel as a blemish on this map. In their view, this should all be Muslim in that part of the world. So that's just a little sense of where they are in the world and their very unique position. So when the United Nations, or even before the United Nations, I should say, was trying to find a home for the Jewish people. Remember, the Jewish people didn't have a home. If you're French, you can go to France. That's your home people, right? If you're Irish, Stuart, you can go to Ireland. That's your people. If you're German, you can go to Germany. If you're Jewish, where did you go? There was no country in the world for you to go to. It was a people without a country. And so when they were looking for a place to put the Jewish people, because they wanted to get rid of them in Europe, because they didn't really want them in Europe, they thought about, one place was, where's Uganda? Right there. They thought about making Uganda a Jewish state, putting a Jewish country in Uganda. Another option was Japan. They thought they could make Japan into a Jewish state. There was some United States. There was different options. But they were trying to find a piece of land for the Jewish people who had no land until 1948. Okay. Here's the history of the land really briefly, okay? We're going to start with King David, 1000 BC, which is 3,000 years ago. So we sort of looked at that land. King David is there. Shortly after that, the kingdom is divided into north and south, Judea in the south, Israel in the north. 722 BC, the Assyrians come from the east, and they conquer Israel in the north. In 586, the Babylonians come from what's modern-day Iraq, and they come and they conquer the south. So 586, it's all conquered. Then the Persians conquered the Babylonians. So that same land, which was in the hands of Babylonians, is now in the hands of the Persians. 536. Jump up to 332. We have a guy named Alexander the Great, and he conquered a big swath of area, including what is Israel, and so now it was under Greek rule. In 142, the Jewish people revolted and actually had sort of their own little country for 75 years or so. That was called the Maccabean Revolt. The Maccabeans were a family, and so for a little brief time in there, 75 years, it was under Jewish control, sort of. In the 63, the Romans came along, and the Romans conquered the world, and the Romans conquered what is Israel as well. In 37, Herod the Great is instituted as the king, right? He was King Herod. He wasn't really the king of Israel. Israel was still under Roman rule, but he was sort of the king over that area. So don't think of him, he's not the king in the same way as King David, right? When King David was the king, there was no one above him. When King Herod was the king, the Roman emperor was still above him. So that's the history of Israel up until the time of Jesus. Tracking? Okay, after Jesus. In the year 66, the Jews started fighting back against the Romans because they wanted their country back. That war lasted for 4 years. In the year 70, Jerusalem was destroyed, and the temple was destroyed. There was another rebellion in 135, Bar Kokhba revolt. That's where the land was named Palestine. That's the first time it was named Palestine. In 313, so the Roman Empire became a Christian empire. And so that land was now part of a Christian empire. And that's the time when they started building all these churches. In Bethlehem, where Jesus was born, in Jerusalem, where he was crucified and buried, So from 313, it's sort of under that Christian empire. In the year 610, Islam begins as a religion. And shortly after Islam begins, they start taking over areas of the world. In 638, the Arabs, Muslims, took over Jerusalem and that area. They built the Dome on the Rock, so that's where the temple was. And they built that in 691. Okay, up till 1071, then the Turks came in. The Turks are also Muslim. So most of this country has been under Muslim control for most of that time. So the Turks came in. In 1099, the Crusades started. So the Crusades are a period where European Christians said, we need to take the land of Israel back. We need to get Jerusalem back, and we will do it by force. And so there was a number of crusades where they got on their horses, and they started walking, and they got to Israel, and they fought. Sometimes they won, and in the first victory they won, and they slaughtered all the Jews and all the Muslims that they could get their hands on. And the Christians said, finally, Jerusalem is ours again. And the Muslims came back and took it back, and they came and fought again. So that period goes on until 1291, so about 200 years of the Crusades. At that time, Muslims from down in Egypt, called the Mamluks, they came up and they took over Jerusalem. And then in 1517, the Ottoman Empire, this is based out of modern-day Turkey, they took over, and so it was Ottoman from 1517 for the next 400 years until the British took it after World War I, and they said, we're in charge now. That's 3,000 years of history in 3 minutes. Any questions? I'm afraid to ask, but... Basically, it's been in the hands of lots of people over the years. Lots of mostly Muslim control for the last 1,300 years or so. The Jews were as much an enemy of Christians as the Muslims were. And that's been the story in Europe for hundreds of years. That becomes the seed ground for the Holocaust. You say, how could the Holocaust ever happen, right? Christians hated Jews for the most part. Lots of propaganda and all kinds of stuff about how evil the Jewish people were. So that was definitely in their DNA. Yeah. No, so it went back, I mean, it's not the British, the Crusades, but yeah, it went back and forth until they eventually lost in 1291, and then they never sent any more crusades, yeah. Okay. It's an important piece of land. It connects Africa and Europe. Like, it's the trade route that comes through. There's also fertile land there. Like, most of that land in that Middle East is dry desert. And for those of you who've been to Israel, you know along the Jordan River, there's beautiful, green, fertile farmland. And so it was valuable for agricultural reasons, for trade reasons, and for military reasons, right? Like, if you can hold that spot, you can protect everything that's behind it. So, I mean, lots of parts of that world have been fought over, but Jerusalem, one of them. Fred? That there's a... Sure, yeah. And lots of people have wanted to take that from God, right? Like, and that's important what Fred says, is that this has always been God's land. It's never been Israel's land. God says that very explicitly in Scripture. This is my land, and you can be on it, but it's his land. Yeah, Margot. Just say that last sentence again. That is God's land. Yeah, even if we go back before King David, you're talking. Yeah. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, so even in Noah, that land is already in view. So God has had a place for this land from beginning. Yeah.
Jeff, a lot of that land wasn't always productive. And if you go back in history, Israel had peacefully acquired a lot of land that was totally unproductive and made it productive. And that's when it drew interest from opposing.
You're talking about modern Israel. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the agricultural techniques that the Israelis and the Jewish people brought to that land, yeah, they've made lots of that productive that wasn't. But it wasn't all barren barren, dry land. Yeah. Sure, and now it looks like good land, right? Okay, let me do a little bit more here. I don't know how far I'm going to get. We'll talk about Theodor Herzl. He's an Austrian Jewish journalist in 1896, so 130 some years ago, 20 some years ago. He published an article called the Jewish State, or the State of the Jews, in which he said the only answer to the Jewish question in Europe, and there was a question in Europe, what do we do with these Jewish people, was to start a state of Israel for the Jewish people. And so that is the birth of political Zionism. So when we talk about Zionism, we're talking about the people who believe that the Jewish people should have a country of their own. So that sort of begins very much in 1896. Before that, it's not talked about much at all. Certainly in the Jewish people for the last 2,000 years, there is a desire for their land again, but they got very much used to living in the rest of the world and maintaining their faith. So Zionism begins in the late 1800s. One of the slogans was, a land for a people, a land without a people for a people without a land. And half of that sentence is true and half of it's not. There was a people without a land. As I said, the Jewish people had no land. There was no France, Germany, Ireland that they could go to. But it was not a land without a people. And so it was sort of sold as, here's this big empty tract of land. There's nobody there. Why don't we send the Jewish people to live there? In 1917, Arthur Balfour, who is the Foreign Secretary of the British government, made a statement about what to do with this land. So 1917, that's in World War I, right? And so the Arabs who were in that area helped the British fight against the Ottomans, right? That's the Turks, and they won. And so they got the land. Great Britain got the land. And here's his declaration in 1917. His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. So basically, Great Britain says, we want to make a Jewish country in Palestine. And here's the two caveats. The people who are already living there shouldn't have their rights infringed upon. You should make a way to live with them. And the second thing is that if a Jewish person lives somewhere else in some other country, they shouldn't have their rights infringed upon. So that's what they proposed in 1917. It took another 31 years for this to happen. When Great Britain declared this, Palestine was only 6% Jewish. So only 6% Jewish in Palestine, and they wanted to make it a whole Jewish state. So at that time, lots of immigration happened from Europe into Palestine at that time. So here's the British mandate. So after World War I, Great Britain said, this is our land, and that's what they held. You can see Syria was under the French, Iraq was under the British as well. So basically, France and England divided up the land in the Middle East. And this was the portion that British had. And you can sort of, the red line is sort of modern-day Israel. Yeah, we have to leave it there. We're out of time. We're just getting going. But it's 10:17. So I will pick it up next week. We're going to start in World War II, and we'll continue the history. It's going to probably take us all next week to get to the end. But thanks for listening. Thanks.